I describe myself looking back as a very emotionally articulate, needy person. I was really good at precisely describing my neediness. And I think it's because I didn't love myself, which is kind of related to hating yourself. And so the only way that I was getting any form of feeling of love or appreciation or affirmation was from external sources. I used to hate myself. Now I hate myself a little bit less.
Today we're going to talk about self-love, the lack thereof, and one man's journey to hate himself a little bit less. Let's get into it.
Welcome back.
Hello.
It's nice to see you again.
It's terrible.
Or see you for the first time. Yeah, it's been a while. But yeah, as you can see, we've tried to foray into some video.
If you're listening on audio only on Spotify or somewhere, know that there now is a video version of this.
Nice.
We have a glorious 3-camera setup.
That's right. Yeah.
So we'll be working on our body language in addition to working on some of our presentation here.
That's right. We'll leave a link to our freshly minted YouTube channel somewhere in the description notes. But yeah, it's good to be back. We got some good feedback, I think, from y'all over the last couple of months, and we're going to do our best to integrate that and act on it. So upwards and onwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with that, how you feeling today?
Feeling pretty energized, but feeling like I might fade quickly, which is an interesting combination. I've just been feeling really weirdly tired the last couple of days, and my energy just ebbs and flows like crazy. So if you notice me kind of fading a little bit, that's what's going on. But aside from that, I'm pretty excited to be back and grateful to have these kind of conversations again. Yeah.
Where would you park your energy level?
Oh yeah. Whoa, I forgot. Whoa. I'm at a 7, a solid 7.
Oh,
I feel like
nice.
Maybe physically 6, emotionally 7.5.
Okay. Nice. I think I'm similar.
Yeah.
I think I'm similar. Yeah. I think mostly just because it's been getting cold here in San Francisco. So yeah, it's been a little hard to fall asleep. I think I'm also physically a little better, like a 7. Energetically, maybe like an 8. Yeah, I'm just feeling excited. It's been so long.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to be good to get into it.
On that note, what are we getting into today, Kevin?
Yeah. So one thing that's been happening for me over the last few months since we last hung out together is a lot of therapy. And one thing that I've been processing or getting more clarity on is that I realized that I really don't like myself. I would go as far as to say that it has something, we'll get into it, it has something to do with how I was raised, but definitely my default, and this is kind of the through line across some of our previous episodes in season 1, is that I just really have a disdain, a hate for myself. And for a long time, that's kind of was my fundamental motivating force or orientation. And recently, as I've tried to get into new relationships, get into improving my relationship with career and work, that whole, the structure of it all is just starting to come out in not good ways. And that's what we've been talking about in therapy, and then ultimately led to this conclusion of, I just think I hate myself. And that's kind of why a lot of these dysfunctions happen, which, we can talk about.
Yeah. Definitely feeling some direct empathy for this experience of recognizing parts of ourselves that we don't really like. But I'm excited for you because I think confronting that is really the only way to actually get past it. I think many people, myself included, really have felt that for a long time, but we just kind of cram it underneath the bed and pretend it's not there, which has never been a particularly effective strategy.
Yeah, no, I mean, this was definitely months of digging with my therapist to really get to. And here's some examples, right? In the last relationship that I was in, I pretty early on was able to label that I was an anxiously attached person. and it manifested as being very emotionally needy. I think I describe myself looking back as a very like emotionally articulate needy person. Like I was really good at precisely describing my neediness at any given point in time. And I think it is because I didn't love myself, which is kind of related to hating yourself. And so the only way that I was getting any form of feeling of love or appreciation or affirmation was from external sources.
Right.
Whether that be from friends or significant other or even at work. Which means that without it, if I don't get it, I'm at zero. I just feel like a piece of crap. Which is why I was so needy.
Yeah.
And that kind of manifest. That was like months of sessions, all summarized in one sentence. And then similarly at work as well. Like I was really, I think I've talked about it in previous episodes, but just like chronically afraid of failing and making mistakes. And I think fundamentally it's because I thought that if I made mistakes, then people at work would like me less and respect me less. And because I had none of that. I was able to give myself none of that as a default, right? Again, because I thought that I was fundamentally worthless and just a terrible person. Then it's like without that, then I'm nothing. And so that is like, I don't know how to describe it, but just like it in my mind, it's like you absolutely above everything else need to avoid that situation because then you'll feel like garbage. But then that limits my ability to grow, take risks, learn things, challenge other people. I just became a very agreeable person all the time across all of these facets of life. Because again, I without other people's appreciation or like signals that they like me, I'm kind of like a non-functioning blob. Which actually is trivializing it a little bit. Actually, it feels like it just feels like you are nothing and worthless. Yeah.
It sounds like for a very long time, your entire self-conception was that your value was not only tied to other people's expectations for you and value of you, but was only made of that. And then in the absence of that, there's nothing. There was like no value because the only flows of love and appreciation were external because you didn't have any way of giving that to yourself. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. That's a very, I guess I didn't experience it with that level of clarity. In the moment, it just felt like I couldn't be without, or it just felt really, really, really terrible. The consequences were like dire, must be avoided at all costs.
So you mentioned this manifesting in a bunch of different ways in relationships and in work. How are you seeing this actually show up in your day-to-day life?
You mean now, looking back?
Looking back, like now that you have the awareness of these patterns, what was the behavior you were seeing in yourself?
Oh, got it. Yeah, I mean, in relationships, like I was just very clingy, basically, like wanting to spend time like all the time, needing to hear, or I needed to hear or see that the other person loved me or that they appreciated me or they liked me on a regular basis. It's almost like an addiction where you just like, I need a hit kind of. And then like you get a hit and then like it kind of wears out and then you're like, oh shit, I'm back to like no love or no appreciation. I need more. So that was like constantly me bidding for love, affection, and attention. In work, it just looked like, I never really pushed back on things. People would just tell me to do things and I'd be like, okay, like if you think this is, the right thing to do and if that'll make you happy, then yeah, let's do it. Because, instead of being set up to focus on, what is the best thing for the company or the product or the users, I just wanted to placate people.
Right.
As long as my peers like me, as long as my boss liked me, then we're good. And ironically, the exact opposite happens when you do that.
Yeah, in both domains, both in relationships and in work.
Exactly. When you're constantly pulling for things, the other person's like, wait, that's like feels like it's a lot. Like, are we like moving too quickly? Like, and then in work, it's like people actually, they're hiring you to be independent and to like push back and have your own opinions and be able to drive, some form of direction, like without other input. And when your mode is to placate and people please, all you're doing is you're basically asking people to tell you what to do because you don't want to be wrong. So you're asking constantly for the right answer,
Right.
Which makes you way worse at, what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. So it sounds like when you really think about what it would have taken for you to be really effective or honestly satisfied in these roles, it became clear eventually that your desire to please people was actually impeding that. And if you like dug a little bit deeper, the desire to please people was just very direct desire for love, and you didn't have this recognition that there was a way to give that to yourself.
Exactly. And I think that's maybe the key takeaway that I had, which was it's not wrong to want these things. And it's not wrong to get them from external sources. It's just about a balance thing.
Yeah.
Where you don't want to be entirely dependent on external things.
Right.
At the same time, I also think, I don't know if this is a hot take, but I also think you also don't want to be entirely dependent on internal as well. Because I think it's by getting all of these things, this love, time, affection, care from other people that like helps you connect more deeply. And I think there is something to be said about getting to a place where you can learn how to ask for and receive both from yourself and from other people. I think that's, in my mind right now, that's what healthy looks like, that I'm like working towards.
Yeah, totally. I think the goal is not to cease your ability to feel external validation. That's just kind of another way of rejecting love. Like it sounds like you've spent a lot of your life rejecting any sense of internal love, but you also don't want to reject external. You just want to recognize that there's pathways for both of these things. You don't need to be entirely dependent on one or the other. Because there's also going to be days where even if you manage to cultivate some kind of sense of very strong internal self-love, there are still going to be situations where you just like kind of feel like crap. And having a bit of a boost from friends and family can go a long way.
100%. Yeah, exactly. I'm just drawing connections now. Like what's coming up for me is all the we've talked about kind of the independence like symptoms over the last season. Like in episode 1, we talked about dark energy and how I like really I used to draw a lot of motivation.
Oh, used to. Huge.
Okay. Maybe that's a little too much. But yeah, I still definitely get a kick from it.
Yeah.
But I think it's much more balanced now.
Totally.
But yeah, like dark energy being this idea that, it's like responding exclusively to negative feedback, being told that you're worthless, you're terrible, and you feel like you're deficient, therefore you work hard to get back up. And then in episode 3, I think we talked about how I'm really bad at receiving compliments, which makes sense if you think that fundamentally you're worthless. And so when people tell you, hey, you're not worthless, you like are good at these things, you're like, lies. I know that's not true. Yeah. So it's kind of cool seeing that progression.
Yeah, man. I've definitely seen the arc for you. Like I've seen the ways in which your thinking actually has changed. I think for some people, their mental models for some of these things change, but for you, I've seen it like very clearly behaviorally. Like I've seen situations where there was an option to push yourself harder to a place where honestly you probably would have been more uncomfortable in a way that would not serve you. Like, just pushing your body to its maximum and then being sore and basically non-functional for a few days. So it's been really cool to watch you pause in those moments and really ask the question of like, what do I actually want for myself right now? And I've also just seen the ways in which you have repeatedly talked about this idea of giving love to yourself and how that was like a huge realization that was a thing that you can do and just applied it. Like I've seen you bounce back from really hard things repeatedly. And from my perspective anyway, part of what has allowed that rapid bounce back has been that recognition that you can give yourself love, and then the practice is to actually do that.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Yeah. How's that landing?
Pretty good. I think I think it makes a lot of sense logically, but I think one thing I'll also talk about is during the therapy sessions, when I first uncovered this moment, I also viscerally experienced how emotions and trauma in a way can be very physical. The moment when we kind of discovered this, like me and my therapist, there was literally, we do therapy remotely, so it's over Zoom. But there was literally like a 2-minute period where it was like I was like in my chair, but like incapacitated. Like I was sitting like this, and I literally like couldn't move. It felt like there was like an anvil like on my chest.
You had like sleep paralysis, but therapy instead.
A little bit. I was just like it was hard to. I wasn't like suffocating, but it was a little hard to breathe. Like I was like, and it was like there was like a moment where I just couldn't move physically, and I was there for maybe like a minute or two.
Yeah.
And it was just like physically processing that, this is something that I've, obviously, like as a human, you like need love and affection and just like good vibes, basically. And there was a part of me that just has been like yearning for this for like my entire life, like decades. And then I think we finally found him.
Yeah.
Like within me. And that was just like such a huge release moment that I was like, I felt it like beyond like feeling in the heart, just like full like body experience.
Yeah.
Which was,
yeah. Some of this stuff sounds really, really woo until you've experienced it. And then you just kind of get it.
Insane.
That like there really is this really strong somatic component to processing this stuff. Like I've had all these weird experiences where it felt like some kind of dark core in my chest started to break apart and parts of it just fell away. It is amazing how in the context of a single therapy session that how intense the emotional curve can be in the course of an hour. It sounded like that one was like pretty huge.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I've had a few of these moments over the months, but this was the most. This was definitely the apex of everything coming together, like months of work.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to know more about the actual process for this. And I want to know about this because I definitely have spent a lot of time over the last couple of years interacting with friends where I can tell that they're really down on themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think in the past, my strategy would just be to tell them all the things I appreciated with them. And I'll still do that. But I have an increasing recognition that as long as their self-conception is a certain way, they will be unable to truly receive those compliments because to them, it just reinforces this concept that everyone is lying to them. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't really help manifest this clear sense of self-belief, of self-love. So from your experiences going through this therapy, like what actually helped you tap into the recognition that you can provide that to yourself, that you're not worthless? Because that's like a thing that I would love to be able to share with more friends that when I start to see this pattern in them.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a generalizable solution.
You can't just magically give everyone self-love.
Unfortunately not. I can't just do the Cupid thing, shoot some arrows into people and they discovered that they love themselves. I think for me it was identifying kind of, I mean, not to be stereotypical, but like key moments in my upbringing with my parents and how I was raised that led to this. Like one of the, I think, cornerstones of this old conception of self that I had was in Asian culture, like humility is one of the crown virtues. Yeah. That's really, really appreciated. And I think for good reason, but the version of humility that I was taught growing up was just that you should always think that you're inadequate. From the perspective of, there's always something you can probably learn from any situation. You can probably use that to be better. It's very positively intentioned. Mm-hmm. But I think the way that I interpreted that or internalized that over time was that you just never give yourself any credit for anything. Like you're always looking for the things that are not good, things that could be better.
Right.
So fundamentally that like was a little bit of a break. A new definition of humility that I really like is humility is actually more just about pure peak authenticity with yourself. And you just want to be super, super honest with yourself about like, these are the things that went poorly, but also these are the things that went really well. And I think having that balance, I think is pretty critical. And so I've been trying to lean into that more. Like part of that is scary because you have to also trust your internal compass and your level of taste at any given point in time. But it's also like, it's it's okay for your taste to evolve. That's going to be a separate thing. And so one thing I've been focusing on is to just trust that tiny voice in my mind that says, this was good.
Whoa. Yeah.
A little bit more. Because the part of me that is like, this bad is very full adult, overpowered. The part of me that's like, this is good. It's like a small child.
Yeah.
Needs some raising.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that was a big part of it. And then, yeah, I think that's actually honestly the main thing. There's other small ways where, parental influences have helped or not helped over the years. Just like, again, being an Asian culture, the way that you express love is like, you cut some fruits.
Yeah.
And I guess like I never heard it or really experienced it. Like Asian parent love was like pushing you really hard because that's how they show care. And yeah, never really expressing anything.
Right.
So, yeah, I just never really felt it from my parents in a way. And yeah, not that my parents didn't love me. I just think there was maybe like I don't know. I don't know if this makes me like a words of affirmation person. But I just never really felt it like that growing up. Mm-hmm. I always felt very physically secure. Like parents did a really good job, like, even coming from a pretty low means background, like roof over my head, like well fed every day. Like they were always physically there.
Right.
Just not like they took care of all the physical stuff really well, but the emotional stuff was very neglected. Right. And so in that way, I also like didn't really know what it looked like. Like I didn't know it was okay to like want or need even like these things. For a long time, I think I felt like, oh yeah, the physical, practical stuff, that's the important stuff. This emotional stuff, that's like whatever,
Impediment.
Yeah, or just like it felt like it's weird to say it. It felt like a privilege to be able to worry about that, like from a Maslow's hierarchy of needs perspective, which I think is a very immigrant thing. But anyway, that played into it a lot as well. Just like all those things like that. Humility teaching, and then also just feeling like I never had a good example of what it looked like to healthily receive from other people, and then that kind of weirdly flexed back, and it also means that I didn't really know that it could be a thing that I could want or need or ask for, or expect even. So,
yeah, I think it's a hard thing to know to want without having experienced it, and like I mean, the read I'm getting from your description of the way your parents interacted with you, it sounds like their priority was making sure that your like survival needs were really well taken care of. And there's kind of actually two phases of that. There's the phase of while you're under a roof, like we're going to make sure everything's okay for you. We're going to make sure there's food for you. We're going to make sure that like you have shelter, that you're safe from any physical harm. And then from my perspective anyway, part of the pressure of like you need to get your shit together is actually trying to make sure that when you're on your own later, that those things are okay.
Yes, independence.
Right.
Also, you're highly valued.
Right. But I think it's like independence specifically in the survival independence.
Yeah, that's a good point. My parents definitely stressed that, like from an early age, like, we're not going to be around for forever.
Yeah.
So you need to like be able to figure it out.
Right.
By yourself.
Right.
And yeah, one other thing we talked about in therapy is that like my parents basically taught me to parent myself.
Yeah.
It kind of like I would constantly get berated for like, why did we have to tell you this? Like there should be a part of you that just knew that this is the right thing to do. And it should have like, lectured you on our behalf kind of thing. And that definitely happened as well. That's another rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah. The internal cultivation of a parent figure is really interesting. I think that for most of my life, my expectation was that as I got older, the immature parts of me, the childlike parts of me would just kind of give way to the more adult part. But I think the reality is that you just build up more facets of yourself.
Yeah.
I'll get more into this in another episode about a different kind of therapy called internal family systems.
Nice.
But yeah, it makes sense that your parents were very intentionally cultivating the sense of parenthood in yourself with the recognition that they're not going to be around all the time.
It's very practical.
Just really want you to be okay. It's just that okay in that situation means that you don't starve or like get very sick or injured.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like the concept of thriving, I feel like is not as emphasized, or at least not the same kind of conception of thriving. Yeah, I mean, kind of that top level of Maslow's hierarchy, self-actualization. Sounds like that part was much more of a mystery for you for way, way longer.
Yeah, definitely. This was why I think it's a very immigrant thing.
Yeah.
Like if you're coming up from like a very poor upbringing, like that's literally your concern, right?
Yeah.
But there's an irony to it where like your parents are working really hard, they're immigrating to a different country to like build you up and hopefully push you into the next tier of the hierarchy. But there's also like foreign territory for them. They have no idea like what it's like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because like for them, I think like growing up, that was the chief concern. Like no one really provided them with like a stable roof over their heads. And, you know, my parents started working really, really early when they were teenagers.
Yeah.
Didn't really get to finish school. So I think from that, for them, like that was the thing. And then once they achieved that, huge props to them.
Yeah.
To which I am like purely a benefactor. It's like that's totally new territory, right? And so there's also in hindsight now, kind of a lot of compassion as well for like how hard they worked and like all the really good intentions, and just also kind of realizing to your point about at some point building yourself up to become that adult figure.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I think I just realized that I guess it's my turn now to take the torch and keep going.
Yeah.
And really provide the things that I need for myself. Now that I'm in this kind of new uncharted territory for my parents.
Right, exactly. Like it sounds like they did a good job of instilling a sense of their parenting style into you so that you could parent yourself in that way. But you're just discovering now that in your current environment, there's some parts of that parenting style that are maladaptive. And now you have to train a new parent that is totally different than what your parents are, which can be pretty disorienting.
Exactly. It's like we're further along now on the path of self-actualization, and there are limitations to the previous style.
Yeah.
Now that I'm, I guess, further along.
Yeah. Going back to something you said a little early that I thought was interesting was this different conception of what humility means. It sounds like before you had this conception that humility means never recognizing the positive, only recognizing the path of growth, or the path of only recognizing the facets of things that could be improved, rather than appreciating what things were actually working well.
Yeah.
And that a lot of cultivating self-love for you was actually just about recognizing that the facets of things that went well did go well. And there's almost a second level to it of recognizing that you need to trust your sense of taste, which is weird because there's also like a humility in that. Like for me, sometimes there's a barrier of like, who am I to have opinions about like what good means in this domain where I don't know anything.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like I think it's scary because you have to, in order to trust it, to truly trust it, I think you also have to recognize that it could be wrong.
Right.
And that you have to weirdly be okay with that. And that, you trust that you will learn.
Yeah.
And that it'll improve over time. Like for me, that's how I'm able to trust it. Like I just have to realize that this is honestly the best that I got right now.
Yeah.
And it turns out that like another symptom of the old structure was also that I would constantly seek other people's approval for this reason. I didn't trust my own compass.
Right.
So I had to trust your compass or your compass or your compass.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I just also having interacted with more people over time and like gotten to know them a little bit and how they think about things, you just kind of increasingly realize it's like not rocket science.
Yeah.
And also for the most part, they probably also don't really know.
Yeah, totally.
Like they might know in like one specific domain.
Yeah.
But like for the vast majority of things, not really. And then you ask them how they developed their own taste and they trusted it. And they, made things or said things that they thought were really good or really smart, and then painfully learned that actually,
right.
no. And then you work on your craft that way. And I've been trying to lean into that more. And it's, even as I say it, like I feel this sense of like joy and like lightness, because it's just such a nicer way of being versus the alternative, which is very fear driven, very anxiety driven. It's like, who am I to know? Like, and then you're always constantly seeking for like, the I don't know, some gold standard that, take it from someone that's been looking for years, like I don't think it exists. Yeah.
Oh, makes me feel like kind of like warm and fuzzy. Just, you know, the picture I have in my head is you kind of, it's like this, you as like this like small child that's been running through like a dark world of just like trying to find the one path where like everyone is okay with what you're doing. And then at some point kind of just pulling out a lantern and looking at yourself and being like, wait, I can make my own decisions. I don't need to just be guided by other people's whims and powers and my fear of their reactions. It's okay for me to have my own tastes. It's okay for me to have my own tastes and to learn to follow those. And I also really like the recognition that developing taste is a skill into itself. And like so much of I think so much of our like schooling background, and especially when you stack facets of Asian culture on top of it, so many structures are built with objective external measurements of skill. So you like look at systems of grades, you look at the things that people gravitate towards in terms of just like, you know, objective measurements, like how fast can you run, how much weight can you lift? And those are all some ways of kind of dodging this question of taste, because you don't have to think about taste. You're like, there's a number there. The number is the answer. I am improving because my number is going up. Whereas making claims about developing taste, it feels so nebulous, which is kind of scary to feel like you're spending time developing this very nebulous thing. But in the end, it's crucial because otherwise you're constantly just playing other people's games and being driven by fear of like regression or fear of not growing in these objective measures. It sounds like developing that taste has actually been a really important part of your path of like figuring out what self-love means to you. Is that right?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say that like getting to this sense of freedom and lightness that I think we all want in life.
Yeah.
It starts with loving yourself.
Yeah.
And being like, yeah, I'm not perfect, but I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And, you know, I can learn and push through hardship, and I do good things, I do bad things.
Yeah.
And that's what makes me human.
So before you mentioned some of the ways in which the lack of this showed up in your life, the clinginess or the people-pleasing tendencies at work. As you noticed, or as you've been able to cultivate some facet of this in yourself, like how are you noticing your daily experience change, both externally and internally?
I think in a previous podcast episode, I also talked about improving my relationship with myself.
Yeah.
And in many ways, this is kind of like continuing that same path. Now I'm just able to have a dialogue with myself. Like, what do I want to do?
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of the times the answer is, I don't know in the moment. That's okay. You're like, all right, I guess we'll figure it out. And not being overly stressed about that. And then when you do have an answer, which, by the way, the answer doesn't feel like, oh yeah, conviction, 100%, this is the thing. It's like more like a small whisper of, oh, maybe we should try doing some more photography stuff.
Ooh.
And you're like, okay, yeah, let's do that. It's kind of like, it's almost like, you know, inner child, inner parent thing, where it's like you have a small kid just kind of curious, like, oh, let's try that thing. And then part of me now is being like, yeah, let's go, you know, along with the kid. So that's kind of how it feels like now. And then I can see, I think from a work context, just being able to be more rooted in what I think we should do, what I think the product should look like, having those opinions. Yeah, which is purely from the pressure of like, honestly, being okay with being wrong. Has been kind of huge. It's like, okay, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I'm gonna, you know, give it a shot and have an opinion and risk that. Because it's okay now, because at the end of the day, I can still come back to myself and give myself a hug and be like, yeah, you're good, man. Don't worry. You know, I didn't have that before. And so the failure felt like the end of the world. But yeah. I'm curious though, for you, you mentioned earlier that like parts of this resonate.
Yeah.
Curious, like which parts the most?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't have a resting sense of self-appreciation. And it's not that it's never been present, it's that it's very unstable. So There are days where I wake up and I just kind of feel like, oh, like everything's fine. And then I interact with friends and I just have this resting belief that, not even resting belief, I have this resting understanding of why people like me.
Okay.
Because there's facets of myself that I appreciate. I appreciate like the ways in which I bring unusual conversations, my curiosity, how much I like teaching and how effective I can be as a teacher. But there's other days where in the same settings, the predominant dialogue in my head is like, why are any of these people around? Like I'm kind of a bummer sometimes. Like I can be really negative. So there's a lot of instability in terms of the internal dialogue and the internal self-explanation. But I have been noticing that dialogue shifting, which I will again talk about more when we get into internal family systems another day.
Nice.
So I mean, like, given what you know now, I know you said you obviously can't like provide a recipe to people, but obviously you come really far along in this journey and you have new perspectives from your own path. So, you know, if you do notice yourself talking to someone, if you do find yourself talking to someone that is in the kind of hole that you can now see that you were in, how would you want to help guide them? Like, I think that part of it is just like awareness. Like if someone just like went through breakup, let's say, they just went through a breakup and then their partner on the way out said a bunch of really harsh things and they just have this belief like, man, I'm useless. Like no one's gonna love me. Or like another way this manifests in conversations is someone just always being like, man, like all my friends are so impressive, but I don't have any of those abilities. Like I don't have like a hobby that I'm really, really good at. And I don't understand why anyone likes hanging out with me. How would you try to engage with that now?
A couple of things come up. I think one of the things that I still hold on to is like moments in life where I feel like I'm okay. And for me, that was whenever someone showed me affection or appreciation. I felt amazing.
Yeah. Whenever
someone told me that my work was like acceptable or like good, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's the stuff. And I would feel elated. And now looking back, that level of elation, it's not actually elation. It's just me going from negative whatever to like baseline. Okay.
It's like relief.
It's not exactly.
Rather than elation.
Exactly. It's like that. And so looking back, I'm now realizing that I was miscalibrated, essentially. That what I thought was elation was like just relief and coming back to baseline. And that knowing that if I could give those types of affirmations to myself, this is how I would feel all the time. And that it's okay for that to be the case and that it should be the case. I think that was a breakthrough moment for me. I just remember one day like doing a review with my CEO like on a weekend and just being so stressed the day before. Like I'd put this thing together. I sent it to him for review. I was like, like sweating. And the next day we talked it over for like 30 minutes. We like, did some rearranging, changed some labels, but for the most part it was there. And he's like, yeah, this is great. And then I just remember having the best day after that. I was like, oh yeah, woo, I'm killing it. And it's because I had just gotten a piece of you're doing good. You did good. You did a good thing. And you were capable of doing a good thing. And now you're worth something. And so one thing I would put out there, and maybe this resonates with some people, is that calibration bit was really like, oh, this is what it could be all the time. Was kind of huge. The other tactic that I think is interesting is on days, if you're able to like give yourself affirmations, it's interesting to, on a good day when you feel, yeah, I am awesome, just to write out all the things that you think are awesome about yourself. And maybe asking close friends, like also like, what have you seen in me that you really appreciate? Or the ways that, you think I'm awesome, when actually maybe even ask the scary question of like, why are we friends? Why do you keep me around, essentially? And then I think it's helpful to be able to look back on those days where you're feeling like, maybe not so hot. It's like, oh yeah, these are the things that like make me awesome, that I appreciate about myself, and that others appreciate in me too. Yeah, I think the first thing is interesting because it speaks to whether or not you're going to be able to hear or feel those things.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you can, which is huge step, then the next step is maybe you just need a reminder, which we all do. I think it's super easy to get sucked into moments because there's this weird thing where like human perception is very much shaped by what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
It's like confirmation bias. Like if you're having a bad day and you're looking for all the things that are wrong about you, you're really good at perceiving, like looking for things. If you tell yourself to find things that are not good, you will find all the things that are not good.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's nice to jolt yourself out of that with just, a list of reminders.
I like that. Yeah, the list of reminders thing definitely resonates for me in that I think that I am someone that is comfortable receiving compliments, but sometimes just kind of forgets that how people perceive me. So that can be effective, not only other people, but how I have experienced myself in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that when people are in that state, I'm usually fairly able to help them. The harder thing I have is when people are in the state where they can't even receive it. Because if it's just deflective, like any reminders I give them, again, just plays back into this narrative that like, it's not exactly, I don't think people believe that people are lying to them. I think that people believe that, oh, you don't really know me. Like if you really know me, then you would understand why I don't believe this kind of praise.
Yeah.
And like that it's so pernicious because the claim is basically that nobody really knows them.
Yeah, it's tough.
Like one tactic that I tried with a friend, which didn't actually work very well, was to just get them to talk about all these different people that they really respect, that really respect this person back. And then being like, do you think that all of these people are wrong, that all of them are lying? And this friend was like, yes, I think that all of them don't know who I really am.
Oh.
And I was like, oof. So that was the thing that I found a hard time intervening. The exercise I gave them, I basically gave them homework. I said, okay, go home and write down 10 things that you're proud of. Then like for each of those, write down the reason you notice yourself discounting it.
Uh-huh.
And then I want you below that to write down a reason why that discounting strategy is bullshit. And that recognizing the patterns of your own thoughts, which I guess is like kind of cognitive behavioral therapy in a very narrow, specific sense. Which I think was like mildly helpful. But it sounds like you were able to move through that phase in a much more significant way.
Yeah, because I think what you're describing, it's very logical.
Yeah.
And if for some reason the person is stuck because they're logicking about it incorrectly,
right,
then I think that could be a really good solution. But I think it's much more pernicious when it's like a deep emotional thing.
Totally.
Like the only thing I can say is I think that calibration process I talked about before, if you don't feel like you are baseline at an okay level, which was kind of me, to be honest, I think that takes a lot of awareness already. But I think if you can pinpoint that, then it's interesting to ask the question of why not? And like what is getting in the way of that? And I think that journey is going to be dark and intense probably.
So can you repeat, like why not what?
Why do you not feel baseline okay? Why are you not able to let yourself feel baseline like okay, worthy, valued as a person?
So what was your answer to that question when you confronted that? Was it facets of upbringing and cultural connection?
Yeah, all the things I just talked about. That's why I think it's really hard to generalize. It's like for me, it's like super precise and super kind of nuanced. I'm sure there's some resonance with other people, I would hope.
Yeah.
But
I think the question, like, even though your answer is really specific, the question is really interesting and maybe generalizes a little bit more. Because why do you think that being able to pinpoint the answer to that question was so empowering for you? It sounds like you asked the question of why do I not feel baseline okay? You started recognizing parts of your upbringing as the kind of the catalyst of that. But I've had lots of experiences in therapy where I go from having this vague feeling to a specific feeling to a specific feeling with an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't always actually result in me moving away from that feeling. Sometimes it just gives me more words to describe my state without changing my state. Whereas it sounds like for you, by answering the question, why do I not feel baseline okay, with a specific explanation, it helped you actually move past the problem of not being baseline okay.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the process was like kind of going through. It's almost like we had to find the root node, the root cause, and like the work thing that we had just talked about. That was like a month. The relationship stuff we just talked about. That was like 3 or 4 months.
Right.
My past, dealing with bullying, relationship with parents. Each of those things were like also maybe like 1 or 2 months on their own.
Yeah.
And then it was eventually after like going through this process of vague feeling, more specific feeling cause across all these small things that we were able to draw the umbrella reason across all of those things.
Yeah.
And I think when, at least for me, when being able to find that and then having that moment of like physical understanding, like, I think this is it. Yeah. I think once I was able to pinpoint that and realize that, I like do really need these things and I do want all of them, then it was just about, okay, I should go figure out how to do that for myself because it feels strictly better. So for me, it was kind of looking back, I couldn't even, it's weird. Like you can't see how the dots are going to connect.
Right. Totally.
But I just like, there were enough dots. And then when they were connected, by then it just made so much sense. It's like, I don't want to hate myself anymore. Like that just seems not good.
It's a bad strategy.
That seems like a bad thing.
Yeah.
So we should try to not do that. And then, then you talk to your therapist. You're like, okay, how do you learn these things? Well, you got to process. You got to learn from how other people treat you. And then based off of that, how can you start to treat yourself better? Like I noticed that by that point, I was, giving affirmations to people and checking in and really like, making space for my friends and people that I cared about. That was a skill that we've developed. And then there was another aha moment where I was like, wait, what if I did that for me? And then so it's like a lot of these things, these are just more dots that kind of just made sense in hindsight. And then that's where the whole, again, season 1, like hanging out with little Kevin, that's kind of how that started as well. Like reflecting those skills back on myself, treating myself as someone that's worth something and worth holding space for, worth caring about. Yeah. And then it's been a huge journey.
Yeah, man. I have so much respect for the intentionality behind it because, I sometimes have a hard time not jumping around too much in therapy.
Right.
It sounds like you were, even though there's many different threads of this work, like romantic life, family history, it sounds like there was, at least in retrospect, this pretty clear arc that you're constantly pushing on of like, I would like to like myself more.
Actually, that makes sense in hindsight. Like day-to-day therapy is just like what's coming up for you.
Yeah,
What's
totally.
the biggest thing that's, kind of bugging you a bit? And then I will say my initial motivation to go do therapy was to actually get over my people-pleasing tendencies.
Right.
Which, now I kind of know why that is and where they come from, So we got there, but actually I set that intention and then we didn't talk about it for months. We didn't talk about it for like 6 or 7 months. We talked about work and relationships and parents and all this stuff, right? And then eventually it came back full circle. So.
Do you think that your therapist was like holding that in their head the whole time?
I don't think so. Okay. I mean, maybe, but I don't even know. Like it was just so long, It's just, you got. It's like being an archaeologist. You just kind of dig a little bit here, dig a little bit here, dig a little bit here. Okay, there's nothing here. Oh, let's look like a fossil. Like to dig a little deeper, Like, and then eventually you unearth the skeleton.
Right. But initially, like, this is a bone. I don't know what kind of bone this is. Like, this is a different looking bone. I don't really know how these.
Is it even a bone? Like maybe it's just a rock. But sometimes you have to like, because we had definitely many sessions where it's just like, hey, what did we talk about? Like, You're like, was that a bone? No, I think it's just a rock. All right, whatever. And it's interesting that like time will just tell.
Yeah.
Like whether or not it's a bone or a rock, like you just kind of, is it coming back to bother you? Is it, we talk about it some more. Is anything resonating? And that's kind of the process.
Yeah.
So.
So I mean, like the opening premise of the topic here was that you hate yourself. Like, do you still feel that strongly, or?
My therapist would describe it like we've done a lot of processing.
Yeah.
And now we're in the integration phase of the process, which basically means that I've now learned, at least conceptually, a new way of existing and a new way of like seeing my self-value, my self-worth.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is still deeply ingrained. It's like muscle memory. So like right now the integration process just looks like, as I navigate life and I'm in situations like, dating other people or like in new work situations or meeting new people for the first time. A lot of my instinctual behaviors, they still are rooted in, the way that I conceptualize myself for like over 2 decades. And so now it's just about catching myself. Hey, whoa, where is this coming from? Why are you feeling anxious in this moment? Like, oh, is it because you think you were a piece of garbage? Oh, right. You're no longer a piece of garbage. So how do you want to show up in this situation now? Right? And it's like that over and over and over and over again in just different facets is what the integration process looks like. And I think over time, we're going to basically take this learning and apply it to like social interactions, life situations, right? And eventually that'll be the new muscle, a much healthier muscle memory.
Gotcha. So something the first step was really just recognizing there's another way of being. In fact, always hating yourself is not the only way for growth, and it's not a good way to live.
Yeah.
Whereas now you're like, those things still happen. But when they happen now, at least some of the time, you recognize like, okay, this is the thing that's happening. This is not the thing that I want to be happening on a long time scale. And like, I need to build up some tools to address this. It doesn't mean that it's like solved, but it means at least you recognize that there's a direction you want to move now.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm going to give a concrete example. Like I recently got back on dating apps.
Right.
And the last time I was on dating apps was years ago, before the pandemic. And I think in that state, I subconsciously had been looking for a lot of validation from all these girls that I would meet.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a big part of the motivating force for me being there. And definitely like going back onto the dating apps, like very recently, like I found myself being pulled back into that mindset of like, just taking it very personally when people like, didn't like something or like didn't match me or like, weren't like putting in as much effort as I was, like things like that. Like I just caught myself being very triggered by them.
Yeah, totally.
I was like, why is this bothering me? And it's like, oh, it's because I used to get like, this is how I got validation from people for a long time when I had zero validation for myself. And it's kind of like realizing in that moment, like, I don't actually need this anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think if this person is like, that's totally fine. And like that process of catching yourself and like, whoa, like that's the integration as a kind of recent example.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, to link back to an earlier theme, the new version of the parent you're instilling in yourself, sounds like you still have this very intense, needy version of yourself that runs around sometimes. But now you can kind of like grab them and be like, hey, like, you sure you want to do that? Like, you're going to like, I love you. Like, it's okay. You don't need to go get that over there. Like, if you really want to do that, like, go for it. But, you don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, but it's more like the kid is traumatized. And there's like a moment of like, in my mind, I actually have had a mental image for this. It's like, he's almost like shivering and like curled up in a fetal position and like kind of like terrified, like in the corner. And then I have to go in and like, give him a hug, warm him up a little bit and be like, hey, calm down. It's okay. It's like, it's literally like dealing with like a traumatized person. In that moment, you just like calm them down, calm my inner self down. Like, it's okay. It's okay. What's going on? And then like, traumatized shaking me will start shaking less. And then say like, oh, like if this person doesn't give me love and affection, then like, I'm not going to be okay. And it's like, actually, it's like literally, it sounds like me telling myself, I'm here for you now.
Yeah.
You're always going to be okay now because I'm here. I'm not going anywhere.
I just like felt my stomach like relax and like, whoa.
Yeah, it's actually pretty huge. Like being able to calm yourself down that way and like give yourself that comfort, that emotional need and attention at that point.
Yeah.
And then, once child me is calmed down, then we can bring in the rational part again and being like, remember all this stuff that we did? Look at all this past awesomeness that is you. Yeah. Like, you're good, man. Like, don't worry about it. And then that soothingness is what brings you back. And yeah.
Okay, this feels like a little bit of like an intense question, but when you have that
that like kind of shivering child moment. You're trying to come and comfort them. You're looking at this list of, maybe this is after you calm them down a little bit. You have this list of things. You're like, look, this is the past ways in which we've been awesome. What is that list for you? What are the ones that you find most compelling? Where when you look at your own past experiences, you're like, that actually was awesome.
It's a good point. I actually don't conceptualize it to that level of logical precision. It's just like remembering that like you are loved, you're worthy of love. I love you. And that, you know, you don't need any of this. You can want it, but you don't like need it to survive. You're no longer like a starving child, kind of, to use a physical analogy.
Right. So it sounds like you're not actually pulling on like accomplishments or even specific memories of being cared for by someone. It's just like a recognition of the feeling.
Yeah, it's almost like I've gone through the process of going through the list already. And the way that I experience that is a feeling
I see.
of okayness.
Right.
And then it's just kind of like, remember that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I could go through.
We're going to be okay.
Yeah. I could go through and enumerate, but in the moment, it's enough to just be like, oh, yeah, right. Got it. So it's a process of back and forth. You know, it's the classic 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. But yeah.
So yeah, it's been really cool to see. I mean, I get to kind of follow along this whole journey over the last like year or two, just spending a lot of time together. But I always feel like for these kind of things, having this story compacted into this shorter narrative, it really changes the emotional resonance of it for me. So I really appreciate being able to unpack both on the day-to-day, but then also like the like year-long retrospective. So yeah, feeling the gratitude from that. Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. You feeling pretty complete?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I didn't like realize that I needed to say all of this, but it does feel like a weight off of my chest. Now that I've been able to describe the full arc. I don't think I've ever talked about it in it like that level of detail in its entirety, I think, with anyone. So yeah, feeling very seen and very appreciated, and yeah, just a lot of joy, I think. Yeah, I'm excited for the future, and you know, after all this integration stuff plays out, and I'm fully embodying the new me, I guess. What that looks like across like how I show up in relationships and work and just different facets of life. Like, I think a lot of this work is related to me becoming more of a securely attached person in relationships, and I've never been a securely attached person before in a relationship. So yeah, I think all that it's gonna be good. So yeah, I think I'm feeling like, I think I'm 8s across the board, physically and emotionally, and yeah, I think predominantly just all the good vibes. Just yeah, lots of joy, some gratitude, and excitement for the future.
Yeah, definitely dominant feeling for me is gratitude. It's just so cool to be able to walk on parallel journeys and have such like frequent and in-depth conversation about our growth paths, and also just being able to call each other or to call you whenever I'm like, okay, like I know in broad strokes I'm on a growth track, but I am in the fucking hole right now. And it's just nice to have someone that recognizes that, you know, that is not your only data point. I mean, you know what a larger arc looks like for me, and being able to do that for you too. So like tons of gratitude for that.
Yeah, man. Yeah, no, I appreciate you too. I think, one of the big, not cues, but ways that I've learned to have a better relationship with myself is also how other people treat me. And definitely our dynamic has been a good like anchoring point.
For sure.
Like if you care about Jamie, what would it look like if you also cared about yourself?
Yeah.
You know, like, wow. So yeah, it's pretty huge.
Yeah, and I'm also, I think, like 8s across the board.
Nice.
Usually I like rise emotionally and fall physically, but I think this time just rising on both, which feels good.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Guess we'll call it there.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in again. As always, we'll see you in the next one.